Hello, everyone. We're just going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alexia Magallanes. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be your moderator today. And thank you for coming to Diversify Our Narratives AP Study Tips College Panel. Just a little bit about Diversify Our Narrative. We are a student-led nonprofit that works to fight racism using education and diverse education. So we're going to get right into it, and I'll let the panelists introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Carmen. I use she, her pronouns. I attend Stanford University and I'm a sophomore currently. I'm majoring in econ and minoring in sociology. It's nice to meet you all.
Hey y'all, my name is Xavier Strawn Turner. I use he, him pronouns. I'm also a sophomore at Stanford and I study linguistics. So if you have any questions there, nice to meet you.
Hi everyone, my name is Banaka Norris. I use she, her pronouns. I go to Pasco Hernando State College. I'm a senior there and I'll be transferring to a university in the fall where I'll be majoring in advertising. And it's so exciting to meet all of you.
Hi, I'm Maya Karana. I use she, her pronouns, and I attend Walter Payton College Prep. I'm a high school senior in Chicago, and I will be majoring in environmental engineering next year, and I'm excited to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Brooke Talley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a senior at St. Francis High School and will be majoring in business next year at Columbia University.
So I want to start with some general study tips because often people are intimidated for studying for anything because they approach it with the wrong outset. You have to think of studying as accumulation of knowledge effectively. So therefore, one of the first things you need to do is develop good time management strategies because the time management strategies that you develop in high school will reward you with less stress and more free time in your academic future. I can say this because I've personally messed it up. There have been times where I've put up things off and then it comes to bite you in the back later. So it's just easier if you start doing things and pace yourself. And to that point, study incrementally. So instead of trying to grind for hours the night before something is due or write everything at once, start at smaller tasks and then move yourself up. So maybe 15 minutes the week before, and by the time it's a few days before, you would be doing half an hour to an hour's worth of work. And by that point, you're reviewing content. And then when you get to the point where you're reviewing material that you've already studied, test how well you know it by explaining it back to yourself. And also treat it as if you don't have really an outlook on the subject. So for instance, if you were explaining history, could you actually go and tell these events in a chronological order to someone who has never learned that? And that tells you the areas you have a lapse in because you'll struggle to explain it. And a few other basic little tips are write things down on paper. Literally the act of writing, it helps you retain information. Mix up studying with your friends because oftentimes you'll realize, especially if they have people in your same class, you'll realize that there are areas that you might know better than they do and vice versa, and you can fill in each other's lapses. And then finally, and this is very important, take breaks. You're not going to really gain anything if you just sit there and overwork yourself. That leads to burnout. Find one way to what I call upregulation. So de-stress actively or with people, jog, find some way to get involved. And then find a down-regulation activity. So when you're overstressed, try something to calm down. For people, that could be TV, playing an instrument, taking a nap, but just make sure you manage your workload.
Okay, now moving on to multiple choice tips. I know a lot of the AP is centered around that and they have a multiple choice section. So first, like when you're studying, I would recommend chunking it out into different pieces so you know how much time you can spend on it and getting into that rhythm of knowing how many minutes to allot. And then also if you don't know what choice to choose, I would recommend by eliminating wrong answers because you can usually tell which ones are definitely not going to be the answers, and then guessing between 2 is better than guessing between 4. Also, AP tests don't penalize for wrong answers, so answer as many questions or all of the questions as possible. I know that sometimes, like when I was running out, I would just choose a letter and go all the way down with it because that increases your odds of getting them right. Also, in AP tests, you are supposed to choose the most true choice. I know that sometimes there can be multiple, like they seem like they can be multiple right answers, but look back at how the question is phrased and see which one is most true to how they're asking. Sometimes it can be a wording that shows you the correct answer. And then lastly, use context clues, especially for history and for English. If you've already know a little bit about that time period, or if you've already read the book that they're asking about, you can definitely use that to your advantage.
Some FRQ tips would be to, so for every AP exam, they usually just have like a certain few types of questions that they'll reuse every year. So for example, with science-based tests, they'll often have you set up a lab and ask you questions about the best way to set it up. For history classes, they usually have something involving evaluate and explain. So just getting comfortable with these different types of question formats is really useful. One thing that I would used to do is just print out a bunch and then just every chance I got, just jot down, spend 5 minutes practicing the style of the question. So even if it's not practicing with the actual content, just getting used to the style is very helpful. And then when you're actually taking the exam, one thing that can help a lot is just creating a quick 5-minute plan or plan for the first 5 minutes of the test. So if it's a history thing, just writing down the vocab that you might want to use. For science or math ones, trying to write down equations that would be useful. And then if you're looking ahead to further parts of the questions, you might notice that for a STEM example, a later question would be really useful to answer an earlier one in a specific form, then you know already to be using that form in the part B or whatever, so that part C will be easier to answer. Showing your work is also really important, especially when they build off of each other. You can get points for showing your work. So take advantage of that. Even if you don't know how to finish the entire question, having some work is better than having nothing. And then if you even just make a mathematical error, that's points. And if a later part, you know how to answer part D, but you don't know how to answer part C, make up a fake answer, move on, just show work for part D, answer part D, and it'll be based off of entirely how you did on part D. So just keep going and you'll be fine. And for just try to find major themes. If you know you're comfortable with a major theme more than another, start with that. Just go with that, and that should help you stay a little more confident in yourself while you're doing it, as well as just you'll know exactly what you're thinking of and how to go about it better than if you're just jump in without figuring out what they're really talking about. And then just don't write anything more than you need to know for short answer questions. If they're just asking you, what is this thing? Answer the thing, move on. You don't need to be all fancy with it. And then one thing that is not showing up on here, but is also just important to keep in mind this year, virtual tests aren't going to let you go back, back to previous questions this year, just because the College Board wants to prevent cheating. And they think that on virtual tests, you can contact people, and so they're not letting you go back to previous questions. So just keep that in mind when you're studying and going through the test, because you're not going to be able to skip around, which I know can be a common study strategy.
Okay, so now we're going to go through essay or longer form questions. So the College Board does ask some of these, so you should hopefully be prepared. So the first and major tip is focusing on your thesis or your main statement. So this main statement is going to drive the rest of your response. If you're able to come up with a well-crafted thesis, you're going to be able to do the rest of the parts of the question. So even if it takes you a couple extra minutes, really spend some time thinking about the craft and structure of that sentence or those sentences, because those will help you in the long run. And sort of like Maya was saying, find the question within the question. So getting to the heart of the topic. Sometimes the AP test, they're out to confuse you. They want to convolute the question a little bit more than they need to. So eliminate unnecessary words that you don't think are relevant to the real question and get to what they're really asking you. Don't be distracted. They want to distract you. They're trying to be sneaky, but don't let them be sneaky. You're better than that. So focus in on answer the question rather than sounding academic. This is sort of a twofold tip. So you don't need to necessarily have Webster's dictionary best thesaurus, you don't need to have that type of vocabulary. Obviously it should be on grade level, but don't think about what's a better word for important. Just write down what you need to answer your answer with. It's okay if it doesn't sound like, a professor. You just have to get the answer right. So don't get caught up in the style of the writing rather than getting the answer correct. So if you're completely lost, sometimes this happens, you read the question, you're like, oh man, I don't know anything about this. Try using the provided resources or the surrounding questions for context. So maybe there's something in the passages that they provide to you that can help you sort of figure out a response. Or maybe there's a second question that's there and you're able to sort of understand from that question how to answer the first question. Using those context clues and surrounding resources can be helpful, especially when you're really lost. So my biggest tip for studying, at least, is using past exam answers as examples. Oh my goodness, past exam answers as examples. So what that means is seeing what other people did right and seeing what other people did wrong, and then translating that for your own needs. So let's say you see someone that scored a 1. Figure out why they scored a 1. They didn't just get it because they're a bad writer. What did they include in their answer that someone who scored a 5 didn't, right? So you need to sort of evaluate those two different things, compare and contrast, and then take the good and leave the bad.
Okay, so the day before the test or the night before the test. So from personal experience, cramming for an AP exam does not always result in a higher or good test score. Often it results in a lot of lack of sleep, which leads to many mistakes on the test. So reviewing flashcards or topics you struggle with, that's something that you can do the day before the test, just to give your mind a little refresher. But if you had previously prepared, paid attention in class, and ran over some practice questions a week or a couple days before the test, you should feel prepared. So this should be very uneventful. You should relax, take a shower, get a good night's sleep, go to bed early, and leave time in the morning to be prepared. You can prepare your pencils and paper to limit the stress for the next day. And sometimes meditation or reading a favorite book before bed can relax you and prepare you for the next day. And often the most important thing is to just get a good night's sleep and have confidence and know that your studying and your regimen have paid off.
And with that, that concludes our panel. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to our panelists for participating in this panel. And we will now be transferring to the Q&A portion of the webinar, which will not be recorded.